Pixel Sift.
Hello and welcome to episode 27 of Pixel Sift. Each week we dig into the games and concepts you might not hear anywhere else. My name is Gianni and I'm joined by my co-hosts Scott and Mitch.
Hey.
Hello.
And doing the fancy video controlling is our controller of video, James, and he's tucked in away around the corner. He always tries to make sure he sets himself.
I can see it from here this week.
He can. He's here. It's true.
Yeah, he's there.
Hi, I'm Megan Summers, the producer and co-owner of Screwtape Studios in Brisbane.
I spoke to Megan from Screwtape Studios earlier this week about her new game Damsel. That interview is coming up later in the show.
Yeah, so we're also talking about kind of no grind game mode. Say if you don't really feel like playing the game all the way through, but you want to experience all the content.
Yeah, and finally, Legal Schmeagle. We're having a look at the mods and the copyright issues that come along with them.
All that and indeed more on this week's episode of Pixel Sift.
Pixel Sift!
It's not Pixel Sieve, it's Pixel Sift.
Pixel Sift!
Yeah, so sometimes we buy a game to only have the majority of the content, such as like characters or levels, locked away. And this is common in games like the Lego game series, like Lego Star Wars, and I guess to an extent the Super Smash Brothers and fighting game series, like Street Fighter and things like that. Like the characters are locked until you can unlock them with gameplay time, or in some instances with Super Smash Brothers,
Would you go as far as to call that a bit of grind work?
Yeah.
A bit of a grind.
Pretty much. But even in Super Smash Brothers, you have to wait till a character kind of presents itself to be unlocked. And sometimes you just really don't have time for that and you just want to play the whole game. So I guess we thought of a concept called like low grind gaming, where it's just maybe you have an option to just turn all that off and access all the content in one go.
Just jump straight into it, you reckon?
Yeah.
Yeah, see, this kind of thing is, I think, becoming a little bit more of an issue. And there's been an issue for a while. I remember there was that game, Warframe, had a pretty big issue with their grind. I remember there was a big kind of forum outcry for it because I followed that a little bit. I mean, for them, I could understand it because they had games like,
well, in the sense...
Dota 2 and Heroes of, Newerth, or however you say it.
New Earth, I think.
Yeah, well, in the sense of... I'm not really talking in the sense of MMOs, because MMOs are all about that kind of thing. It seems like that's part of the culture.
Yeah.
There is I guess there's a push for those sort of aspects where you are kind of getting people to come back and do a little bit more every time and, get into the sort of flow of playing a game regularly. And there's a push for that to kind of exist in more and more types of games, some that we might not have seen previously.
Yeah.
I think just because it's a part of RPG doesn't mean it can just be done slack. I don't like when you have to go back to the same areas to do the same kind of grinds and it's just repetitive and just not adding to the game in a kind of any positive way.
That's really interesting that you mentioned RPG there, because that's something you kind of don't always think about, but so many games say that they've got some sort of RPG element in it. And that's obviously then part of that RPG is obviously the grind
but
to
is
get
it just
level
grind
up.
work? Because, yeah.
Well, I mean, that's sort of what people are doing, and they're hoping that you create your own sort of character in order to do that. But say, for example, like Smash Bros., you're not creating your own character. You're just going to have to do the grind work to get those characters.
To unlock that particular content that you will have access to later. It's not like you won't, but you just can't access it as soon as you put the disc in the machine or get the download installed. Yeah.
I do remember with the first Star Wars Lego game, you could actually put in a cheat code which unlocked everything straight away.
Ooh.
So if you wanted to jump straight into it...
Funny you mentioned cheat codes. I feel like that was what used to be the case with games. Like you could just put a cheat code in that was put into the game. But I think that might have been replaced by DLC. Like things like the things that cheat codes used to grant you are now kind of DLC elements, I guess.
I think about games like, for example, StarCraft or Warcraft 3, games that I really enjoyed, but I played through the storyline many, many times with Invincibility on because the story was still really enjoyable to play through.
Yeah.
But the grind of playing the game, once you played through it once, you didn't really want to play
do
it.
all this stuff, all the things that take you that extra kind of
20,
hours
30
and
minutes
hours.
or whatever.
Yeah.
You just wanted to get
So all we're getting at was a little lazy. Yeah. So
Well, no. It's
means-
just like if I'm spending hours in the game, I want to be doing it, spending hours that I really enjoy, kind of, actual gameplay and, challenging parts of game, not just crappy walking around, opening up boxes. And like, I did mention this last week at the live Pixel Sift Comic-Con thing, like Bethesda and their lockpicking mechanism for Fallout 4 and Skyrim and whatever else they've used it in. And I really liked that. I thought that was a good bit of kind of addition to a grind and changing it a little bit.
Yeah.
But when you're using this kind of stuff, I want there to be something in that, like, suitcase or door or whatever. Like, don't just put it in there just to add extra kind of time to the gameplay. That's just going to piss me
Bethesda,
off.
I don't want to open this case and find a sack of dirty rags. I've got
Exactly.
plenty of dirty rags at home, all around me in my house.
Wasting
I
everybody's
don't
time.
need to collect them in a game.
But it's kind of pisses you off and it's disheartening. I mean, collecting things is a great part of these games. And again, I'm going to keep talking about this style of gaming. But like, say Diablo 3.
Yeah.
Loved it. Love, getting new things and enhancing my player. But it gets to a point where you're spending more time doing that than you do actual playing. And that's where it starts to get a bit wearing for me. I want some good balance there.
granted, there is, the argument against this is like, the developer made a game to be played, obviously, and so you don't want the customer just flicking a switch and missing out on half the content that you made and that you put time into, and then they're just skipping over it.
And there's
Yeah.
lots of games, I don't know, that I feel like, yes, that's if you're looking for that type of game, that's perfect for you. But some games where I know for a fact that I just don't want to pick up at all because I know of the grind element in it. Destiny, for example, I don't put nearly as much time into that as I probably would have done, because you can kind of only have one of those games in your life. You can't
true.
have multiple grindy games at the same time. We've had a lot of this open world sort of stuff that's come out recently, and we talked about this a bit in last week's episode, where it's an open sort of format story, non-linear sort of story, but you can kind of go in any direction. But then that, without having a linear sort of story, you have a quite open-ended time requirement as well.
I feel like those kinds of games, like the MMOs, are not like they're not really what I'm referring to. It's like if you want to experience the story, and like you can pretty much experience all that Destiny really has to offer in those first maybe 10 hours of gameplay if you really wanted to, but there's other elements that you can really explore, and if you really want to engage in the culture of that game, then you can choose to do that if you want to.
I don't think it's unfair I think it's unfair to not talk about MMOs when we're talking about grind work, though, because they
Absolutely,
are one of
yeah.
the kind of genres that really do, or can anyway, rely on it too heavily. Some games don't, of course.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to note that some people do like grind working games, and the whole mobile game area is kind of built on that. I recently myself just uninstalled Fallout Shelter off my phone after way too long, because I just got to the point of like, what am I doing? What am I doing? I've wasted way too much time on this, in quotes, air quotes, game. And I don't know. I don't
Sometimes
even
as
know where I
well,
was going with that. Just a
like
little
the
unhappy
grind
rant.
is actually your monetization strategy, basically.
true.
So, they put these elements into your game, make it addictive enough, but they make it so that if you actually want to progress at all, if you're not paying money to play the game in terms of buying little speed up things, then you have a huge grind against it. And it is technically possible to play it, but it just becomes basically unplayable after a certain point. I've played a few mobile games like that where the gameplay itself was fantastic, was probably the one that comes to mind is Tiny Tower, which you can play on mobile, but is a very similar sort of format to Sim Tower, which came out on the computer many years ago. And you're basically going through similar sort of format, all that sort of thing. But I got to a point very quickly where it was very clear that I had to spend some money in order to progress in the game. Otherwise, I'd be waiting like 12 hours.
Well, as with mobile games, there isn't a huge kind of end. There's no end game really, because if you end game, then they stop having the opportunity for you to spend money.
If I for a second bring us back to like the Super Smash Brothers example,
Yeah.
if there was like, say, next Super Smash Brothers come out, it's probably going to be called, I don't know, Super Smash Brothers Artillery or something like that, and then that comes out and you have an option to pay, I don't know, $5 extra in the Nintendo store to unlock everything. Like everything is unlocked, all the characters, all the maps, all the items, whatnot, and even all those trophy collectible things. If you just wanted all of that, pay an extra $5. Do you think how many people would go for that?
I think a lot of people
heaps would. Yeah,
I would
heaps.
personally, I'll consider going for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
And
because I don't Super Smash very often, but it's not the kind of game where you are doing anything different per level, really.
Yes.
You're not doing anything different to unlock these things. So I guess the grind work there is just continuous play.
Yeah.
which is understandable and very easy to do. But yeah, people are going to circumvent that for $5 for sure.
I think it's a time requirement. Some people will
It's
not
like
have the
some
time to
people
do
just
it.
don't have that time.
Yeah.
That's why I got so pissed off at Fallout Shelter, because I was like, I'm wasting so much time here. I mean, granted, it was usually toilet time, but still,
Yeah. It's a fun game.
it's my time.
It's a fun game, but it does take a lot of your time. Let's jump into our next story.
Visit us on pixelsift.com.au.
Earlier this week, I spoke with Megan Summers. She's from Screwtape Studios, and we talked all about her brand new game that's coming out very, very soon called Damsel. We spoke all about learning lessons from making games for mobile, paying for your indie game development, and making games in Queensland.
So our game Damsel is our first PC game that we worked on. So it is an action arcade platformer, which, like all games at the moment, we have had to find some nice words to explain it. The levels are very short form. So it's a really fast-paced action platformer where you're attacking vampires and gathering intel a lot so that you're finding new locations in the world.
So when you say short form, what does that mean exactly?
So each level is between 2 and 5 minutes to complete. So we have 120 missions, all approximately 2 to 5 minutes to complete. So this story is a lot more, is given through conversations, whereas the action part is quite fast-paced.
You guys have previously worked on sort of mobile games. What were some of the big things that you've learnt transitioning from a mobile game into, making a PC game?
Mobile was fantastic for us for a long time in the sense that it gave us the ability to quickly iterate. It gave us the ability to test designs, play with different styles of games. But the artistic style on mobile is harder to do because you have less space. And we've always loved the more artistic games. So as we were moving towards the kinds of games that we really wanted to make, we sort of almost needed to move away from mobile in the sense that having enough actual space on there, on the actual device, to show off the art that we wanted to show off. But our game has got a lot of the flow and progression systems that we've learnt from being in the mobile space. You're able to create a much smaller game and a much tighter system. And then we were able to, we realized that we've moved across quite a lot of things without even realizing it, that we learnt in the mobile space.
In a recent talk that yourself and Anthony gave for Game Dev Brisbane, you sort of mentioned that when you were developing the thing, you had a really good idea for a story when it first started out, but it wasn't enough to kind of turn it into a game. What was it that you kind of had to do to kind of change the story idea into a game?
So really, the story idea, it was going to be a very linear, story-driven game. That was the plan. That was something that Anthony and I, especially starting the company, had always wanted to do. But at the moment, in the market that we're in, we had to really differentiate ourselves from other games. And at the moment, a story-driven game, there are AAA titles doing that. And they're doing that much better than most people in indie could do. So we had to, the change that we ended up making was this change to shorter levels, to making it more of an action arcade game. So the story is now only given in between levels rather than our levels being progressive through the story.
When you're making these tough decisions, do you have something that you say, all right, these are the things that we are absolutely going to have to nail down and we're going to try to compromise on other things? And what's your list of priorities?
For us, it's become making sure that the game is fun overall first. I think we got too attached to story, and as much as that really is important, we allowed it to guide us in a place where the game actually wasn't a fun game, or it was, but it didn't have a grab to it other than just being a nice progressive story.
And well, actually, that leads in quite well to my next question. In that same talk, you were mentioning that you were sort of soft pitching it to someone that you knew, and that one of the criticisms that was kind of given that having a game that is just fun isn't sort of enough anymore. Can you kind of explain what that means?
We were lucky enough to talk to a publisher agent. We went to him trying to find out if the game that we had If we could pitch it to a couple of small publishers, get a small amount for us to be able to polish it up even more and complete it. So really, the idea of that fun isn't enough is sort of on that second level of the game, whether you can sell it. Your game may be fun and people may play it, but it's about, will you be able to sell it to enough people to be able to make the next game that you want to make? So we have to have a grab in the game that you can see it on, a poster that your friends are sharing around, and it's an idea that grabs you rather than having to churn hundreds of thousands of dollars into marketing for people to actually see the game. That was our main reasoning why fun wasn't enough anymore. Because you can have a beautiful, fun game, and if you have the money to market it, people will buy it. But in the indie scene at the moment, and the platform genre that we'd chosen was very flooded with similar style games. So finding the hook rather than fun being our hook was really a hard thing to hear, but it made us realize that the market that we're in as a small company really was determining what our game had to be in. We've been trying to go to a large number of events with the game. I think the art style in the game is making that style of marketing for us work really well. I don't know if it will work for everyone, but the style of the art really is grabbing people to those small images on social media. We also talk to a lot of people. We go to conventions and conferences wherever we can. I think from the indie marketing in the sense of being out on social media, but also make sure that our artists are the ones making those images. And it's not just me as a producer taking an image out of the game. It's our artists creating specific images as well that are really grabbing people. And somehow that social media marketing got us an invite to PAX East.
I mean, you mentioned PAX East there, and traveling to these conventions from somewhere like Australia over to the US. There's a big cost sort of associated with doing that. How do you balance the risk between getting your game out to a broader audience?
Well, for example, we had actually decided not to go to PAX on our own this year. It wasn't actually until we were invited by the PAX Rising team, which allowed us the ability to have it. It's a little bit cheaper cost for smaller indies. We don't get as much space there. But so that was what first made us decide, okay, we need to find the money to get us there because we're being asked to be there. So there are a few options in Queensland for funding. Screen Queensland does have some travel allowances for games. That's about the only funding we're eligible for. But hopefully that will actually cover most of it for us.
So in terms of funding from the Queensland government and Screen Queensland, it looks to be quite limited in terms of comparing it to, say, somewhere like Victoria. How do you pay for a game in Queensland? How do you make a game work?
You'll probably find in Queensland, you'll be talking to people who have a lot more investing their time and money from their own bank accounts, whether it was because they were at a bigger company and had redundancies happen. And so in the last 4 or 5 years, people have been going through their savings a little more up here maybe because we don't have that ability for as much funding. Screen Queensland does have one funding option for games at a very early level. So there is the chance for funding when you have a concept. Unfortunately, we've just been not at a place where that was going to be viable for us. So all of the money for Damsel has been personal investment for us.
For people who probably wouldn't know, what is the Queensland game development scene like? What sort of things are we seeing people making?
It's sort of really like a small Melbourne. It's just as passionate. We just don't have as many people. It's a little bit more spread apart. But we have major international companies such as Kixeye, who are working on Invaded Conflict, an MMORPG. And we also have Gameloft, which is another international company. So we have those two companies, which is great. They're able to bring, juniors in who can be trained by seniors. But the indie market here is actually quite big. Halfbrick has been around for a decade now. They are still one of the most successful companies in Australia when it comes to gaming, with Fruit Ninja and Jetpack Joyride, as well as then putting Fruit Ninja into the educational game system. We've got Defiant Development. They recently sold a game called Hand of Fate, which was the first indie Australian game to be on the Xbox One. We've also got a couple of guys who've broken off from Half Brick, the Pretty Great Studios. They just won Game of the Year for their game Landsliders last year. We've also got smaller companies like Disparity, who made Ninja Pizza Girl and Run Fatty Run, as well as Sponge Games, which you'll probably see around a fair bit at the moment with their game Fairly Breaks. So there are quite a lot of studios that are actually not just making games, but they're making successful games.
Megan Summers of Screwtape Studios there, talking about the Queensland game development scene, their brand new game Damsel, which they're taking over to PAX East in the US very soon, and
looking wicked.
Yeah,
And Ninja Pizza Girl.
a Ninja Pizza Girl.
What is
good
that?
too, yeah.
That sounds awesome.
Well, we'll see if Megan can put us in touch with some of the great Queenslander developers
Yes,
over
please.
there.
That sounds
Great looking game, looks
awesome.
smooth, great art. Yeah, I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to playing that one.
Damsel, amazing
Damsel.
stuff. Keep an eye out for it.
Yeah.
Coming up very, very soon.
Did you know Pixel Sift is available on other platforms? You can find previous episodes on iTunes, Pocket Casts, YouTube, and on the Pixel Sift website.
So, modding is a huge part of the gaming community, as we all know. Though it does fall into a rather grey area of legality, developers and modders generally do live a peaceful coexistence. There's a long list of modder-created games that have gone on to be just as, if not more successful than their original forms, like Counter-Strike and Dota. The list literally does go on and on. It's hard to hate against this sort of progress and work. I love the level of user engagement and, user generation as well.
But it's not always as peachy and friendly and innovative as
That's
some would
Snappy
like.
turn there, Gianni.
Sometimes, commercial interests can get involved with modding and, the process of doing that.
Yeah, they have many times.
Yep. So in the case of some arrangements, like the companies will tend to just get rid of that kind of thing. Yeah. And yeah.
There's one example of modders who use who are creating custom content for the F1 game, and professional sport and all this sort of stuff is very tightly controlled, and content and licensing and all of these things are very, they're very granular in the way that they do it. So, it's people creating a lot of extra stuff that maybe not sanctioned within the advertising code or whatever.
I
gets
think
shut
in
down.
this case, it was the sense of real world, I guess, business politics getting in the way of art,
It's
almost.
real life money and sponsorship getting in the way. And this is the problem with sports stuff in general. They're not just making general things, or, they're not just editing general creations. They're editing something that actually exists and emulates real life and has, monetary interests in that. So this F1 thing was basically just changing the skin of the F1 car to update it to, new year or whatever. But the problem there is obviously that somebody paid for that car to look like that way in real life.
In the game as well.
So therefore, they want it to look like that in the game as well, because
Yeah.
the money continues on to, represent them. So that's what that issue lies. And the same thing, like I said, with all sports, with FIFA. And I remember we had this with Pro Evo earlier in the year, even at the end of last year when they weren't updating their rosters very well. Same sort of thing. The problem there was that the problem there is, as far as modders go, is that they are changing someone's invested interest.
And there is all these deals that exist in the background that are, bigger than
anything.
There's a really interesting example of, especially in sports games. There was a NES NFL game that was created for the original NES, and they updated it to include the rosters and the stats of the last
I saw that.
Super Bowl game.
Very cool.
Yeah, and they were like, "Oh, what's the NES, result? What's the thing?" Like, kind of like getting the octopus to judge who's going to win the
I watched
World
that.
Cup. Yeah, very funny.
I
sort
didn't
of
watch
stuff.
the regular Super Bowl, but I watched the NES generated,
Generated
preview of it.
version. Yeah. Modding is a really interesting thing. Is that a lot of people start out, and if you were at Oz Comic Con on the weekend, Jess Watson from Let's Make Games basically said that modding was where a lot of people started out when they're going to make games, and to have something that you've worked on kind of be shut down in terms of copyright claims and the business claims of something that that you're not going to make any money out of.
Actually, that's a really good point that Jess made there. Like, as far as all artistic kind of fields go, it's really good for people to have an entry level kind of thing for that. I know as a producer myself, I started editing other tracks, and even as my pictures, like sketching and whatever. It's a good entry level, and to take that away from people, I guess, is a bit of a...
And also put the heavy hand down on people who are kind of like starting out.
Discouraging.
Yeah.
Did they modify the performance of the vehicles at all?
I don't...
Oh,
in F1? No. It's just a skin.
Okay, because off the top of my head, this is not something I've done any research in for this episode, but I remember...
one job, Mitch.
Yes, I just thought of it just then.
Okay.
I seem to recall the Call of Duty series actually working closely with gun manufacturers to make sure their guns sound and appear and perform very similar to their real life counterparts.
Well, I've heard a counter story to that. That for example, people who are developing Battlefield, they actually don't tend to make the guns exactly the same. Like it'll be a particular brand, but because they do have to pay licensing fees.
Exactly. So I thought, do the gun companies, like I know people mod shooting games, and they mod guns are usually modded in shooting games to a different performance. So I'm surprised that we haven't seen anything from a large gun company saying, hey, the Desert Eagle actually doesn't look like that or perform like that.
Yeah.
Or you're not allowed to put it in there because that's our intellectual property.
As far as shooting goes, nice little segue onto Counter-Strike and a pro, I guess, as far as modding goes, coming from Half-Life, as I'm sure a lot of us know. It's problems like this, as these games get bigger and, people will start to pay attention to them. And, you've got issues with end user license agreements. You've got problems with copyright infringements and...
Well, I mean, think about it. Valve's main games that they have now coming out all started as mods. Team Fortress 2 was a mod.
It's true.
Left 4 Dead 2 was a mod, and Left 4 Dead was a mod. Counter-Strike was a mod.
Yep.
But that's an example
was a mod.
Dota, yeah.
That's an example of a company really embracing that, though.
Yeah, and they've always been very big on getting fan sort of content in there. But
even another high-profile one is Arma 2 was made pretty famous by the mod DayZ.
I didn't even hear about Arma 2 until DayZ
exactly.
came out.
No one knew about Arma 2. Yeah.
Yeah, and I went out and got that because of this game that was supposed to be really, really interesting. People take, I guess, liberties with the ways that they include sort of crossover content. But I remember you can play as Spider-Man in Skyrim if you feel like it, or you can have the sounds of Zoidberg whenever you fight any of the little mud crabs. That sort of stuff. It's just kind of like a remix sort of culture that we have. And should be encouraged.
I remember in Gran Turismo, whatever the last one I got into was, 5 or something, in the online with that, modders could basically change around any of the details of the cars, but to the point where it wouldn't adjust it very well. So you'd have tires out here and a little mini and whatever, and just ridiculous, horsepower and whatever. It's fun. It's just fun, and it enhances the game.
Regarding cars, I think
shut down.
I'm surprised we haven't seen any outrage of this modding community. In the GTA series, when people put real-life versions of actual cars in video games. Like currently in GTA 5, there are 2 cars that, to me, look very similar to their real-world counterparts. It's the I think the Buffalo S and the I think it's the Vapid Dominator. They're both the Dodge Charger and the modern Mustang, respectively.
All of the cars on GTA are based very, very, very closely.
very, very
to
loosely.
No, very closely to something else.
Yeah.
Like I could tell you every single car and what it represents in the real life.
But in the sense that they're not the cars. They're definitely not. And that's because no car company is going to have their car in a game where the car can be used as a weapon.
Yeah.
So, but in the modding community, they have modded the vehicles to look exactly like the Ford Mustang and the Dodge Charger. So I'm surprised there actually hasn't been any outrage from those 2 companies. It's like, why have our cars been put in this? They are technically our IP.
Yep.
This is exactly how they look like, but they're being used to kill people in a video game. I'm surprised there's been none of that.
By the same token, very subtle, non-paid for advertising in
Exactly.
the game. And now everyone's talking about it as well.
Yeah.
We'll keep talking about different video game stuff throughout every week. We'll be here again next week and probably the week after that.
No,
3 weeks down the track, who knows what's going on.
Listen to Pixel Sift.
That's right. That's all we've got time for today, so thank you very much for tuning in. If you want to find out more information, we've got great links to things like Damsel, some links to great mods and stuff, you can go on the Pixel Sift website, and that website is www.pixelsift.com.au. And Scott, if people are going on social media, where can they go?
Look, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Twitch. That's all at /Pixel Sift. And we're also on YouTube at .com/Pixel Sift AU.
And Mitch, for people wanting to listen to our older episodes, or if they want to watch some of the videos and stuff that we've made?
Yes, they're all streamable on our website, or you can download them on iTunes, Pocket Casts, or using the RSS link on the website.
Perfect. And if you're on iTunes or any of your other podcast players, if you give us a review and a star rating, that'll really help us out and help people find the show. We've also got Steam as well.
Yeah.
You can watch us on Twitch. We're everywhere. Thanks for listening. We will see you again next week.
Thanks for everybody that came to our Comic-Con panel.
Yeah,
that was
Amazing
wicked.
fun. Thank you very much
Yeah.
for that. See
Peace
you
out.
then.